If I told you that there's a country where one single company created 1 out of every 5 jobs, and that its profits were so high that they actually prevented the country from falling into an economic recession, I'm sure you'd all imagine I'm talking about some oil-rich nation or something similar. You'd probably picture some poor, extremely small country swimming in tons of natural resources. But no, nothing could be further from the truth. We're talking about none other than Denmark and Ozempic, the miracle drug for obesity.
Ozempic's biggest side effect, turning Denmark into a pharma state. You might have heard of petrostates, countries where fossil fuel extraction dominates the economy. By that measure, you might call Denmark a pharma state because Novo now dominates the Danish economy.
Novo Nordisk, the company behind Ozempic and Wegovy, the weight loss drugs everyone is talking about, became Europe's largest company overnight. Not Volkswagen, not Airbus, not even Louis Vuitton, not even other far more famous pharmaceutical companies such as Germany's Bayer or France's Sanofi. And of course, as wealthy as Denmark is, for a country of only 6 million people, being home to Europe's largest company by market capitalization changed everything. The impact was so great that the Danish government began publishing the country's economic data both with and without Novo Nordisk factored in. To give you an idea, in the last quarter of 2023, the pharmaceutical sector, which is basically Novo Nordisk, generated more than 3% of GDP. Or even crazier, thanks to Ozempic, Denmark's economy grew by 2% that year. Without this miracle drug, its economy would have gone into a recession with negative growth. Even so, things aren't as rosy as they seem at first glance. Some experts warn that Denmark could fall victim to the infamous resource curse, only instead of oil, what it has is the patent for one of the most in-demand products in the world. And the truth is that we're already seeing some signs of this.
Denmark's weight loss drug champion is slimming down the entire economy. Ozempic makers' decline means pharmaceutical giant is no longer the country's greatest success story.
On the one hand, the Danish economy has become as addicted to Novo Nordisk as obese people are to Ozempic, which in itself creates many problems. Yet on the other hand, the oil wells are starting to run dry. We mentioned earlier that Novo Nordisk became Europe's largest company, but we were speaking in the past tense, because since then, its stock has plummeted. In between, we have a story of the race to innovate, cutthroat competition, and even a tiny bureaucratic error that has cost the company billions. What's going on with Novo Nordisk? Could this company's decline drag down Denmark's entire economy? Well, we'll tell you all about it in this video. But first, if you're interested in the world of investing, if you want to learn how to manage your savings, protect yourself against inflation, and figure out how to make money beyond your day job, I've actually got some good news for you, because at Visual Factory, we have created the Visual Factory Club, a newsletter where every week we send out free content focused on essential financial education, the ABC of what everyone should know to understand the stock market, financial markets in general, investment platforms, how to assess investment opportunities, and which markets may have more or less potential. Because of course, if you want to invest your money so you're not at the mercy of your country's economic instability, you at least need to understand the basics of the financial world. In the Visual Factory Club, you'll learn all of this completely free of charge. Through the link below and this QR code, you can sign up for the club and start receiving the upcoming editions. What's more, when you sign up, you'll receive a dossier where I explain in a clear and simple way the most essential investment concepts, what multiples or the PE ratio are, what indices are, ETFs, derivatives, funds, EPS, you get the idea. After that, every week you'll receive additional materials and market analysis to help you stay informed about what's going on. And by the way, the sooner you sign up, the better, since we send each episode of the series by email, and every edition is unique. If you're not subscribed, you might miss some of them, and you won't be able to access them later. But with that said, let's get into this video. What you see on the screen is a Gila monster. If it doesn't look like much to you, don't worry, it's no big deal. For centuries, everyone has completely ignored this lizard. Very few suspected that its saliva held the key to creating a miracle drug. And we don't say miracle lightly. In 2005, this lizard's saliva was used to create a drug to treat diabetes. And 12 years later, it was used to create semaglutide, also for treating diabetes. It would take another 4 years until 2021 for doctors to confirm that a higher dose of the same substance could treat obesity with an astonishingly high success rate. From there, companies around the world rushed to experiment with this concept. Keep these two details in mind because they'll be crucial later on. Ozempic for weight loss is simply a higher dose of a drug that already existed, and other companies rushed to investigate how it works. Interestingly, the pharmaceutical company Pfizer had already studied semaglutide in the 1990s and discovered even then that it had potential as a weight loss drug. But they decided against further research, pay attention here, because there wouldn't be a market for it in the future. They couldn't have imagined that in a couple of decades, the number of people with diabetes in the US would increase fivefold, and the number of people with obesity worldwide would exceed 1 billion. Yes, I know that many of us associate obesity with wealthy countries, but believe me, it's a major problem in Latin America, and it's even starting to become an issue in many African countries. In any case, the fact is that Pfizer let a historic opportunity slip by, and that opportunity was seized by a Danish pharmaceutical company that, yes, was already a large and well-known company, but was still off the radar for many people. Novo Nordisk. This company's rise has been unprecedented. In about 3 years, its stock price increased fivefold, representing an annual growth rate of 75%. Overnight, Novo Nordisk found itself in a massive market where there was simply no competition. Because let's be honest, before Ozempic, all these so-called weight loss drugs were snake oil, scams with no real effect. But let's look at some more figures so you can understand how this giant transformed Denmark's economy. In 2025, this company sold $50 billion worth of drugs, more than 10% of Denmark's GDP. Novo Nordisk employs 1% of the Danish workforce, and in recent years has directly created 20% of all new jobs. Besides that, 10% of Denmark's population are shareholders in this company, either directly or through pension plans. And what have they done with all the money they've made on the stock market? Well, they've spent it. For example, at restaurants, thereby creating even more jobs. It's estimated that if we take these indirect jobs into account, Denmark owes Ozempic half of all the jobs the private sector has created in recent years. Yes, you heard correctly. Half of all jobs. And this creates a huge problem. The Dutch disease, commonly known as the curse of natural resources. You see, most of this company's revenue comes from the United States. This isn't surprising. We're talking about a huge, very wealthy country that also spends the highest percentage in the world of its wealth on healthcare, and where, let's face it, there are a lot of overweight people. This means that Novo Nordisk exchanges its medicines for dollars, but then has to exchange those dollars for Danish kroner to pay most of its employees and cover its tax obligations. In other words, demand for Danish kroner skyrockets. And when demand rises, so does the price. And the price of money is its exchange rate. In the case of the Netherlands, the discovery of natural gas caused its currency to appreciate so much that its export industry collapsed as its products became more expensive for foreign buyers. This isn't happening in Denmark because the Danish krone is pegged to the euro. But obviously, to keep the exchange rate between the krone and the euro stable, Denmark has to keep interest rates extremely low. Right now, this isn't a problem. But imagine if inflation suddenly skyrocketed. Then, Denmark would have to choose between keeping its promise to keep its currency pegged to the euro or raising interest rates. Pay attention to this, because countries like Switzerland have already faced very similar problems. Of course, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves. The thing is, the main threat right now isn't that Novo Nordisk will sell so much that the currency ends up appreciating. No, the problem is exactly the opposite, that the company is collapsing. But first, some context. Denmark isn't the first Nordic country where one single company turned everything upside down. Take, for example, Finland with Nokia. Nokia, which was once the world's largest mobile phone manufacturer, came to account for 4% of Finland's GDP and 70% of its total market capitalization. But do you know anyone who still uses a Nokia? I don't, and it's no wonder. Nokia failed to adapt to smartphones and fell, dragging the Finnish economy down with it.
Steve Jobs took our jobs, the then Prime Minister said in an interview. The Research Institute of the Finnish economy estimated that Nokia's direct contribution accounted for over 30% of the GDP decline and 20% of the decline in employment between 2008 and 2014.
When the 2007 financial crisis coincided with Nokia's collapse, Finland experienced a much deeper recession than its neighbours, and it also took longer to recover. Could something like this happen in Denmark? Well, it's not that it could happen, it's already happening. At its its peak, Novo Nordisk was trading at 1,000 krona per share. These days, it hovers around 230 and 300. The drop has been so steep that, in just 1 year, it has wiped out all the gains it made starting in 2021 with Ozempic, bringing it almost back to square one. Look, the company still has a future, but one that's far less bright than its shareholders and all Danes had hoped for. Its operating margin has fallen from around 25% to less than 15%, and sales are expected to grow at half the rate of last year. Keep in mind, all of this is happening when only 2% of the world's obese population is taking medicine. Or put it another way, Novo Nordisk is sinking despite being pioneers in a market that's growing at an annual rate of 85%, and that's actually accelerating. What could have triggered such a debacle? Well, there are many reasons, but the main culprit has a name: Eli Lilly. Eli Lilly is the US pharmaceutical company behind Mounjaro, Zepbound, and retatrutide, weight loss drugs that are GLP-1 receptor agonists, thanks to tirzepatide, which is very similar to Ozempic, but distinct enough to fall outside its patent. Think of it this way. A patent is a monopoly. When Novo Nordisk skyrocketed on the stock market, it was because it had a monopoly on a miracle drug with a massive market. However, that monopoly was much more fragile than it appeared at first glance. And so throughout 2024, Eli Lilly's stock rose by 60%, while Novo Nordisk's fell to less than half its value. The American company has developed drugs that are apparently even better than Ozempic, innovated by making it much easier and more convenient to take its medication in oral pill form. And they also understood the American market better than anyone else. Novo, like any good European company, believed that Americans wouldn't pay for healthcare out of their own pockets, so they waited to strike deals with social security and health insurers. But they could not have been more wrong, and that is precisely where Eli Lilly saw a golden opportunity.
Eli Lilly grasped that very quickly and had a few direct-to-consumer channels where you could go on the website, get a prescription from a general practitioner, and buy it yourself. There was very little reaction from Novo Nordisk to that.
As a result, Novo lost a significant portion of its most important market by a huge margin. But it doesn't end there. Eli Lilly, which, by the way, was the first major global marketer of insulin, was able to compete with the Danish company because it held the patent on a similar, yet slightly different, molecule. That said, there are other companies competing against Novo Nordisk by selling exactly the same drug without violating any intellectual property laws. How is this possible? Well, if you recall, Ozempic is a higher dose of a drug that's been around for quite some time. So long, in fact, that its patent had expired in major markets like India. And when the patent expired in India in 2022, suddenly more than 100 different companies started selling Ozempic, but under a different name, and for a third of the price. If you ever visit India, know that you can buy a month's supply of treatment for just $30. But we're not just talking about India because it's a massive market. This country is also the world's pharmaceutical powerhouse, specializing in selling extremely cheap versions of off-patent drugs. This means that when the patent expires in other countries, as will happen in many places around 2030, India will have a massive industry ready to export the same medication to them before a ridiculously low fraction of the price they used to pay. But wait, on top of all this comes one of the most ridiculous, yet also most damaging mistakes this company could have made.
Ozempic generic approved in Canada after Novo Nordisk fails to pay $250 government fee. Canada has become only the second country in the world to approve a generic version of the blockbuster drug Ozempic, made possible after its manufacturer, Novo Nordisk, failed to pay a $250 Canadian annual fee.
Yes, you heard correctly. A lawyer at Novo Nordisk either forgot or refused to pay $250. And as a result, they've lost a market worth billions. Keep in mind that Canada isn't just Canada, it's also the gateway for many Americans who shop there. But going back to the question we started this video with, how might this affect Denmark? It's still too early to say, but for now, Novo has announced the layoff of 9,000 workers, nearly 1 in every 7 employees. Of these 9,000, 5,000 are Danish workers. We're talking about the largest mass layoff in the country's entire history. What's more, Novo Nordisk generated so much tax revenue that the government started spending as if there were no tomorrow. VAT on electricity? 0. The sugar tax? 0 as well. After all, if someone gets too fat, they can just take Ozempic and they'll collect a little more in the process. And then there's child rearing assistance, plus social security benefits. Well, you get the picture. For now, they can afford it. They're even maintaining a surplus of 2% of GDP. But clearly, if revenue starts to fall because of Novo, will Danish politicians be able to cut spending without social backlash? We'll have to wait and see. Look, Denmark isn't going to turn into Venezuela. Finland recovered from the Nokia crisis and remains a very wealthy country. But it's true that they went through a rough patch, and now Denmark may be on the verge of experiencing the same thing. In any case, now that we've gotten this far, it's your turn. Did you know that Novo Nordisk stock is plummeting? Were you aware of what this giant means for the Danish economy? What do you think will happen in the coming years? Will it rise from the ashes, or will this be the end of it for good? You can leave your answers down in the comments. And if you want to really understand what's going on in the markets and learn how to manage your money with more confidence, then just join the Visual Factory Club. It's completely free and the link's in the description. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualEconomik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, hit like, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care. See you soon.